I think we have to start. It's okay. It's all right. It's okay. That's fine. That's okay. That's okay. You can pray. It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. It's fine. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Have you prayed this morning? Yes. Okay, that's good. So we'll just start with the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Okay, so I am today talking about removing the mask in your relationship with your spouse and your children. And I guess I know that Abuna Karas talked to you yesterday about the mask and the impacts of the mask. So I wasn't here, unfortunately, so I'd love to hear what maybe you learnt yesterday, or what you heard from Abuna, or what your reflections might have been, or what your conversations last night after the talk were. Any comments? Fill me in. I wasn't here.
I think we were just talking about hypocrisy more than anything.
Hypocrisy, yeah.
But the different levels of,
Different forms of hypocrisy. Okay, what were some of those different forms? I wasn't here. I'm genuinely just asking what was.
One of them was like, if you're doing things just to make sure people are saying the right things about you.
Okay. So pleasing people.
Pleasing people, like what you should, like you're saying to yourself, what would people say?
Yeah. And that's the ulala.
Yeah.
It's a phrase we all understand, isn't it? Yeah, we're all familiar with it. Yeah.
Like a different mask for different situations you're in, and not being true to yourself.
Okay. All right. Well, today I'm going to start by saying I actually really struggled preparing this talk today. And I was up till quite late, and I was unwell for a couple of days. And that doesn't happen very often. And I was reflecting a lot as I was driving here about why I struggled with this particular topic. And I think the answer that I came up with was because it's actually a challenge, such a big challenge, even for me. And often when I'm talking about different topics, you know, I pray and I try and live the topic before I come and give it. And I've been doing that for a while, since Maggie's asked me to do it. And I found it challenging, very challenging myself, more than most topics that I talk about. So I'm kind of giving a warning that really today really is a conversation with you, as opposed to giving you direction. Because I'm acknowledging up front that what I'm going to be talking about is super challenging. That doesn't mean we can't do it. That means we actually, and I'll show you that we actually have every support and every resource and every capacity to be able to take off our mask with our spouse and our children. But to acknowledge that it's really difficult work and it's ongoing work. It's not, I'm going to take off my mask once and then the kind of task is done, right? This is something that we have to do throughout our lives, throughout our marriage, throughout our relationships, right? So I'm just, I guess, saying that this is, difficult work. So tell me, I should also say that a lot of what I'm talking about comes from Brene Brown and John and Julie Gottman. They're the theorists that I'm working with, which I know some of you will already know. So of course I can't talk to you about their whole theory and all of their work. I've taken bits and pieces out of that, all right? Okay, so what masks do people wear in their relationship with their spouse? You're all married. So I'm asking you to do a little bit of self-reflection individually. Now, immediately in your minds, what are some of the masks that we wear in our relationship? what are the names of the masks that we use? What are some of the masks that we put on and hide behind? What personas or identities or personality type characteristics do we kind of choose to prevent us from being our real selves?
I guess it's like a strength, like we put a strong face on it, people.
Yeah. So we try and come across as brave and courageous. Yeah. I guess like at Karas's talk last night, there are many forms. So what are some others? There's definitely one. And again, this is challenging. I'm asking you to, and if you give me an example, doesn't mean it's necessarily the one you use, but we're just articulating, because really talking about and naming some of the masks or is step one in doing this work. What are some of the masks? What are some of the things you do to protect yourself?
You just like a mask to hide your emotions, like so that you're not showing your true self emotionally.
So what does it look like to the other person? When you're doing that, what's the other person seeing?
That you're okay.
That you're okay? Yeah?
Sometimes they feel that you're hiding something from them.
Yeah, but how do they know that? Or how do they, or what are they seeing?
Hiding behind a smile.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. So I can smile, right? I walked in this morning and I'm smiling. And for everybody else who can see me, I'm a happy person, right? There's a smile on my face. But who knows? Is that a genuine smile? Or is it something that I'm hiding? Is there another emotion behind here that I'm covering up? Okay, a smile, being perfect, being strong, being busy, right? Being busy with my work, not having time. And so there's very little time for me to kind of have a conversation or for the conversation to go very deep because I'm busy. I'm busy doing amazing things. I'm working, I'm doing the washing, I'm cleaning up, I'm doing service at church. Sorry? Yeah, not being home, not being available. Yeah, to actually engage or connect. Yeah. Often our parenting is a mask. Our children come first, right? And so if our children come first, then, there is no depth in the relationship because your second is essentially, if I'm saying to my spouse, my children are first, the message is your second. If I say that my children come first, then essentially the message I'm sending is that my spouse comes second. There's no, there's no running from that. Sometimes I'm too tired or I'm unwell. Sometimes I take on a professional mask, right? And I'm educated and I'm important and I have authority. And so I really don't have time for emotion. Emotion is silly. Connection is silly. I'm a, professional person. Yeah, I put on that mask. Or I put on the mask that we are a perfect couple. Actually, we don't need to talk or have conversations because our relationship's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with our marriage, right?
I guess opposite to that one would be a critical mask.
Yes?
The critic.
Explain.
Always overanalyzing your child.
Yes.
I guess sometimes make it better.
Yes, absolutely. And part of that is also a conversation around what's tangible and physical and practical, right? We have conversations all the time, but we have conversations about what? We have conversations about picking up the kids. We have conversations about the finances. We have conversations about all those other things, but we don't have conversations about us. Yeah, we don't have those. I mean, what do you mean? What is there to us? We're married, we have children, we're living, it's all well. Go to church on Sunday, it's all great, right? We don't have those deep conversations.
short temper or anything?
Absolutely. I get angry very quickly, and so don't go there. Don't try and have a conversation with me, because you know where that's going to end up. Absolutely. And similarly, if I take on the persona of a victim, you know, you put too much on me, I'm burdened, I can't deal with all of this, you know, give me space, leave me alone. Similar, it's another mask, yeah? We're not dealing with some of the root issues. We're not talking about the relationship. I'm putting forward something about myself that's stopping you, somebody else, you know, my spouse, from actually connecting with me. So you can see there's lots of masks. They look very different. And you can see why this is going to be a very challenging conversation. Okay? Okay. So at the bottom, I guess, in terms of what's on the slide, so in terms of what these masks do, why do we use these masks? Why do we hide our emotions? This is the most relevant point. Doesn't matter which mask you've got on, why am I using that mask? Why am I hiding from emotion? Why am I covering that up? Because I'm fearful. What am I fearful of? What do I have a fear of?
Anyone around you and what they think?
What they think, yes. And what they think matters because I might be embarrassed. I don't want to be shamed, right? I don't want to be thought of as unworthy or not capable or unloved or embarrassed or criticized. There's a whole heap of things that I'm afraid of. Okay, so wearing masks, essentially what it does is prevents us from being known, from somebody knowing who we are, and from us knowing others. Okay, so it's a two-way impact. It's going to impact me, but it's also going to impact my spouse. And so when there are two people in a relationship and two people are impacted by my behaviour, there's going to be a serious disconnection. Because it's not only impacting the way I behave and connect, making me disconnect, but it's making the other person disconnect. And so we have two people literally walking in opposite directions. So vulnerability is the answer. And that vulnerability is actually what we're running from. And that vulnerability has two really important purposes. First of all, it is that uncomfortable feeling of uncertainty and risk and that emotional exposure, and that's what we're trying to avoid. But vulnerability is also, more importantly, it's the key to a really, really healthy relationship. It's the key to feeling belonging and loved and joy and courage and empathy and all those things that we get from a really great relationship. So we often think of vulnerability as a negative emotion, which it is, it's uncomfortable, but it's also a very necessary uncomfortable emotion that leads to bigger and better things. Okay? So the message today is vulnerability is something we avoid, but vulnerability is actually something we need to learn to get comfortable with and use to improve our relationships with our spouse and our children. I'm mainly going to be talking about spouse, and at the end I'll comment about children. So anything that makes us feel ashamed or anxious or embarrassed or experience criticism or uncertainty or be ridiculed or feel unloved or judged, you know, our fear that our partner will misunderstand us, and eventually, I guess, the ultimate fear is that they will leave us, you know, that this marriage will end in divorce, that, you know, it won't last. They are the things that we're running from.
It's interesting that running from those things can often end up in a situation where you're walking towards this.
Yes, that's right. That's right. When people near that fire, near that danger, often they do. Often it is the turning point and they go, oh, no, we've got to do something about it now. Hopefully it's not too late though. Don't leave it until it gets to that. We can do proactive work. So when we put on our mask, what we're doing is making a decision to hold back our emotions or our real thoughts. And what we're choosing to do is to actually pretend or to perform, right? We're choosing to actually be somebody else. We're actually choosing to be a little dishonest. We're choosing to not be genuine. We're choosing to create a picture that we think is going to be appealing to our spouse, a different one to who we actually are. And that's kind of problematic. And it's problematic because our relationships with our spouse and our children are actually very, very distinct to any of the other relationships we have in our lives. And what we need, what makes them distinct is there is an intimacy, there's a level of intimacy. We've talked in this group before around different types of intimacy. So when I say intimacy, I'm not talking about physical intimacy, I'm talking about spiritual intimacy, cognitive intimacy, religious intimacy. Is this the manager that's doing the spot check?
Yeah, totally. You think about 2 months.
Please mask everybody. Our manager will walk past and read trouble.
Okay, so we have this very difficult decision to make every single time we have an interaction with our spouse. Every time we get up in the morning, we have a choice to make that says, am I today going to be a genuine person with my spouse, a genuine exchange? Or is this something that I'm going to actually hold back from and I'm going to walk away from and I'm going to choose to be somebody else? I put a verse up there from the Bible when Simon Peter, when Jesus said to him, go out and, cast your net one more time. And Simon Peter saw all the fish. And what happened at that point was that he became very genuine. I don't know if some of you watch The Chosen. This is not an ad for The Chosen, but they do it very well. Where at the beginning, Simon Peter is kind of going, look, we're doing this all night. I know what I'm doing. I've been fishing my whole life, blah, 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 blah. I'm in control here. I know what's going on, right? Anyway, he listened to Jesus when he said to him, cast your net out. And then when he came back, he was feeling embarrassed. He was feeling a little bit shameful, right? But he made a choice at that point to be really genuine with Jesus. And what he said then was, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man. Right? So he revealed everything to Jesus. He revealed what he really thought about himself. So he made the choice to actually not hold back and to tell Jesus his real thoughts. And he stopped pretending and performing to be a fantastic fisherman. And the reward that Jesus gave him after that was to say to him, don't be afraid. I know you're scared. I know this is hard. I know you're scared. You're fearful, right, of what I might think of you. But your reward is that you will be catching men from now on. Yes.
I'm thinking, shouldn't that be happening prior to marriage? Is it dangerous? Not dangerous, but what happens if you do it, soon after you get married?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, absolutely, of course, before we get married, we must be very genuine with whoever it is we're deciding we're going to spend the rest of our lives with. But essentially, every single day, every single conversation, every single interaction, every single problem that you come up against is an opportunity to either be genuine or not. So it doesn't stop. Remember, I started at the beginning by saying this is not a one-off task. This is an ongoing process. There are many things where we decide, and I'm the first one to put up my hand. married 25 years in February, there are still things in a really great, healthy relationship that individuals shy away from. And there are many things that we share, but there are still things that we shy away from. It's just human nature. So absolutely be as genuine as possible as you can, but think about, today is really thinking about what are the bits that you're not showing your vulnerability in. You might be showing your vulnerability in lots of areas in your life, but there will be some things that you're not. And again, just another kind of, PS note at the bottom. This is, being vulnerable doesn't mean I'm going to tell you absolutely everything all the time or at this particular point because I've decided I'm going to be genuine with you. There is a balance because there's two people in this relationship and the other person needs to be doing the same. It needs to be balanced. It needs to be in response to your partner. Yeah? I'm not just going to go and dump everything about all of my fears, all at once, because then that's not a safe thing to do, right, in a relationship.
Is there such a thing as being able to be vulnerable? Like, you're actually being too honest with the other partner? Like, can that be a negative?
If it's all at once, yes, but it can be unsafe if your partner is not responding appropriately. So if I've chosen to be a little bit vulnerable with my spouse and what I'm getting back is not kindness and love and understanding, that doesn't mean I necessarily should stop being vulnerable, but there is a missing element to making that vulnerability a positive in our relationship because it's not being reciprocated, right? If there's only one person sharing and being vulnerable, then you need help, right? The person who's not sharing needs some support to be vulnerable. Okay, sometimes that can take time, so we can be very patient with our spouse. But if it's getting to a point where it's not changing, then you need help and support. Sorry, what was the question?
What should you do to help the other person to open up a little bit more?
Continuing yourself to share is important, but in very small, start slow, small things. So for example, you're not all my spouse, of course, but I was a little bit vulnerable in starting this talk with you by saying, I struggled to put this talk together today. So I'm just sharing a little bit, right? And I see what comes back. And then if the other person shares something tiny, you acknowledge that, you grab onto that, you look for it. And when they share something tiny, say, thank you so much for telling me that. That helps me understand who you are better. That's it. Acknowledge that it was difficult for them. Acknowledge how hard it is for you to be vulnerable with your spouse. So there's an encouraging, safe space.
I don't know, but men, if you're vulnerable, you're worried that maybe they'll lose faith in you or lose their respect for you, that sort of thing. Like, because men's supposed to be the strong side of the relationship. That's the stereotype.
Yes.
So, if you start acting or telling what your feelings, I don't know, just.
Yeah. And gender has to, I'm sure I knew somebody would bring up gender. We all have fears of including Ines is our spouse, right? What will my wife or my husband think of me if I show what I think is weakness? But vulnerability is a strength. Why? Because it's a choice. It's a choice that you make. And so men have that fear. I will look weak because I'm supposed to be strong because that's the stereotype. Women have the opposite. Women say, oh, if I show weakness, then he might think I'm needy and too much of a burden. So we all have fear, but we have different fears based on our gender. Yeah? Okay. So I want you to be thinking, what is it that stops you in your mind individually from being vulnerable and intimate with your partner? Now, recognize that I didn't ask there, what do you think your partner should do differently? Okay, because that's what will be running in your heads. I think my partner should do something different. This is not about your partner, this is about you.
Is that the next one?
You know what I say about all of that. If there's a problem in your marriage, start with yourself. All right. The second thing I want to say is, taking a little bit from here and there, Gottman has the four horsemen. Do you remember those? We did the four. And stonewalling was one of them. And stonewalling is literally this idea that you're building an impenetrable barrier, something really strong between your spouse and yourself, to protect yourself. That's essentially what it is. You're putting on an armor, is what Brené Brown would say, right? You're putting on something that's actually nobody's going to be able to get through. And we do that in three different ways. Okay, so we do this stonewalling, or we do this building an armor in three ways. What we do is we either move away from our spouse by being absent, the withdrawing, by being silent, literally not speaking, right, or keeping secrets. Okay? Now, I can do all of those things and have, on the outside, a perfectly functioning marriage, correct? I can be busy at work, I can be busy at home, I can not speak, I can be the quiet type, yeah, and I can keep secrets around how I really feel about all sorts of things. So we can move away, and that is essentially building that shield, right? Or I can actually move towards the person, funny enough. How? By just pleasing them, right? By doing what they want, keeping them quiet, especially if they're an angry type. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm still not being vulnerable, right? I'm not saying these are my real feelings about your anger, or my real feelings about the way that you're behaving or what you're asking me to do. So I can actually move towards them by pleasing them and doing what they want. The third way is that I can move against them. So what I do there is I actually use my power over them, or my aggression, or some dark, shameful thing I know about them to bribe them, right? To kind of keep them at bay. So that's like your bossy spouse, you know, your aggressive spouse, you know, your don't touch me, you know, I'm too volatile, you know, I'm going to blow up if you talk to me. So three ways. We can move away, we can move toward, or we can move against. And they're the three ways that we can build up, you know, that sort of barrier. So again, in your minds, this is all leading to some very difficult exercises at the end. So do this work in your minds as we go along. So first of all, what we need to do is examine our own fear of vulnerability. I need to understand myself before I can connect with anybody. You remember many talks ago, we talked about a guy called Erik Erikson who said really adolescents or young adults need to understand who they are and have an identity before they form or bind with another person's identity. Otherwise, they're going to be swallowed up. This is exactly the same concept. I need to understand who I am. What am I fearful of? What are my weaknesses? What are my things that I'm really worried about in my life? I need to know what they are first before I can be vulnerable with my spouse. So here's the three questions you're asking yourself right now in your mind. When do you use the strategy of moving away? When? When? In what circumstances? On what topics? When am I moving away? When am I hiding and not speaking? When am I keeping secrets? The second is asking yourself, when do I move towards? When do I just please my spouse to keep the peace? And I hear that all the time. And I hear it, and I've told you before, I had couples who've been married for 30, 40 years. and you know, all of a sudden it's falling apart, and they say, I've been keeping the peace for 30, 40 years. So what they've been doing for 30, 40 years is definitely keeping the peace. There's been peace. It's been a perfect marriage. But what they've been doing is moving toward with a lack of genuineness, right?
Who normally says that for you?
People who've been married for 30, 40 years,
Yeah, which,
oh, both. No, it's not a gender thing, no. Both. Both. And so the third question, he's being cheeky, I know. The third question is moving again. So when, the answer again is when. When do you use your power and your control and your authority and your aggression to move against your spouse? And often what happens is we have one particular strategy that we like to use, but if we are not vulnerable with our spouse, then we can use a combination. There are lots of people, for example, who will move away and just be the silent, quiet type until it gets to a particular point, then they're going to move against, right? You can see how that would work. There's at one point I'm going to totally blow up, and that's what I'm going to use. Okay? So thinking, I said this is going to be a difficult talk. So if you're actually asking yourself these questions now in your mind, you're being challenged.
So I have a question, two questions. Are you can ever be too vulnerable?
Can you be too vulnerable? Yeah.
Can you put a mask of being vulnerable?
Absolutely. You can put on a mask of being vulnerable. You can take on the victim. So I'm hurt.
But you're not,
You don't love me. You're not sharing.
Yeah.
That mask. Yeah, absolutely. That's a mask.
But
Can
it's
you-
not genuine.
No, it's not genuine. No, because it's not genuine because you're not actually talking to your spouse about the reasons why you feel that way. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know what you're feeling. You don't know, like, you can't do it. So you actually have to be self-aware for you to be genuine.
Absolutely. You have to be self-aware to be genuine. Absolutely. And that's the bit that people don't do. And that's why I'm asking you these three questions now. I'm saying this is how you become self-aware. There is an individual piece that has to happen first, just like Erickson said, before you can do the couple work, right? I have to know what strategies am I using. And that's why I said when. What topics, what issues push you to use which strategy?
Does it have to be a topic or a reaction you get? So I might choose to move towards if he's upset. That's his reaction. But because of his reaction, I've chosen that method.
Yes, but what is he upset about? There is a topic, there is an issue. And often, all the time in marriages, there will be repetitive issues throughout a 30-year marriage that continue to come up. Either it's the in-laws, the finances, the children, work. I was trying to think of what they were. Work and like, you know, your lifestyle. So, you know, where you live or your friends or, you know, what you do with your free time. Like, they're the five, you know, top hot topics. And they will continue to come up. And for every couple, there'll be one or two or three, hopefully not more than that, that are the ones that are really the, you know, the sensitive points. And people usually react in the same way because they don't talk about those topics. They talk about reactions, or they silence down the reaction, or they keep the peace, you know, or they get aggressive, or they just don't speak.
That's the end of this question. Can you be too vulnerable?
Second question, can you be too vulnerable? I think I answered it before in that you can become too vulnerable if you're not getting an equal, reciprocal response from your spouse, and you continue to share and overshare for years and years and years, without again being vulnerable and saying to the spouse, there is an issue around the reciprocal sharing. No, I think it's being vulnerable, because if you're naive, then you're hoping that something will continue to happen. You're expecting that something will continue to happen. That's being naive. But if you're vulnerable, too vulnerable, then that means you can't see. Again, you haven't done the individual work to say what you're really worried about is that there's no reciprocation.
So being vulnerable does not necessarily mean it's the solution to a problem
No.
that you're having in a relationship.
It's the beginning of building trust.
But what if the trust is there?
The problem is that we make assumptions.
Yeah.
You assume the trust is there. But if it's just like we assume that a married couple love each other. Right? We assume that a married couple love each other. It's a big assumption, right? If you're married, you must love the other person, correct? Can you really sit there and say that every married couple love each other?
Maybe they care about each other.
Yeah, they might care about each other, but do they really love each other? Remember, love is that, the definition of love, again, going back several talks, the definition of love is ultimate sacrifice, body, soul, mind, right? Ultimate sacrifice of everything that you are. Are all married people in a position where they can say, I have totally sacrificed and am willing to continue to totally sacrifice body, soul, mind for my spouse? Why is it so important that we say to each other regularly, I do love you? Couples that don't say those words, or similar, not necessarily those particular three words, but if we don't express that love verbally, the relationships falter. It's really important. So it's an assumption that the trust is there. If we don't actually confirm that and reconfirm that, it can be ingenuine. It can be an assumption.
I don't know if it's completely related, but we were talking about sharing and things like that. Are we maybe focus on what relates to the two individuals? Because your state of being can be impacted by something completely outside of your marriage, or work, or something else. Now, it's nice to share your state of being, like I'm a little bit overwhelmed because of this, but what if you don't want to go into detail, or you think it's actually not good for the other side, or it's better for you not to talk about it so you can forget about it. That's what I'm dealing with it. Does that then impact vulnerability in any way?
Yeah, it does, because vulnerability, as I said at the beginning, I was a little bit vulnerable with all of you, and I said, I struggled to put this talk together. I didn't actually tell you why I struggled. I didn't actually tell you what it was specifically that made this talk difficult.
I think a lot of us wanted to ask why, but we chose not to.
I'm sure. That's right. That's right. That's a perfect dynamic, actually. Thank you. That's a perfect response. So you're all sitting there going, I wonder why. But nobody was vulnerable enough, courageous enough to say, tell us more.
Tell us more.
Tell us more.
Tell us more.
It doesn't matter when. It doesn't matter when. But do you see what happens? And that's exactly the dynamic in a marriage, right? It's not, well, in this circumstance it might be, but it might actually, it actually shows that you're more interested in me as a person if you asked, than just sitting there going, okay, she found it hard. I will tell you in a second. No.
I was just going to say, kind of what Mark was saying, that was kind of being polite. You didn't want to be rude and fast. Doesn't that still extend like with your partner? You don't want to be rude, I guess. Like I guess some manners that you want to have with your partner. How does that kind of fit in with vulnerability? Like, you don't just
Yeah, like you have this kind of punching bag, and you just say anything that's in your head, just express everything. Yeah, I think like how do you balance manners and respect, and also expressing how you feel?
I was going to add to that, like, you don't want to keep them private, like, you want them to have their own privacy, or like, you want to not hurt them to say something that might hurt them.
Yeah. Being vulnerable is challenging for anybody. And so you're right, we have to be sensitive about that. There is a way to ask. So you're all curious, but by inviting you, there is ways that you would ask me, not what Maggie just did, but there are ways of asking about more detail that is an invitation. It's not a demand. And respect only comes from trust. So if I don't trust you enough to tell you, then there will be no respect built between us. Okay? So it's not, it's less about manners and more about how you approach and want to deepen that relationship. Couples can be vulnerable with each other superficially, right? You know, when you hear couples go, oh, yeah, I know she really, really hates tomatoes. You know, really, really hates tomatoes. You know, okay, there's a level of sharing, great, but that's about what I eat. What about my emotion? Oh, she doesn't like it when somebody talks about death. She doesn't deal with death very well. A little bit deeper. But then the next level might be, she was actually really traumatized by the death of her father. And so when the topic of death comes up, she really needs some support afterwards. And I sit next to her. And I don't say anything, but I know that she needs me to sit next to her. Another level of vulnerability, another level of understanding and trust and respect that goes on, right? And I can keep going, right? So vulnerability is levels. So if you want to be polite, and if you didn't ask why specifically this was challenging for me, you would go away thinking, oh, we really connected with Sonia today because we understood this topic was challenging for her, full stop. But there's several other layers.
I guess where you can fall into the trap of, because you ask, you then sort of put that person in a position to either say, I don't want to share now, or, you know, like they sort of get hesitant. So then what they might think is, next time I won't even mention that.
Yeah.
Because the follow-up will be, if you want to share why.
So two key strategies. First one, don't ask a question. If you ask a question, the other person feels obligated to respond. And if it's your spouse, they feel like, oh, I'm cornered, I have to answer this question, right? That's not an invitation. That's almost it's almost a demand. Hey? Yeah, exactly. So what you do is you make a statement, and you make a statement that starts with yourself, that says, I'm really glad you told me about what's going on at work. I know that must have been hard for you, but I'm really glad you told me. Full stop. There is no question, there is no obligation, but there is an acknowledgement that was a really valuable process. That was a really valuable thing for you to do as a spouse, and that I value that, and I'm looking forward to another one of those. So it's an invitation, which means it's not going to happen necessarily at that particular minute. It might happen 3 months, in 3 years, but there is an invitation.
So then ask why.
You do not need to ask directly because it becomes obligatory. But the statement clearly says to you, I'm interested. I'm available to hear.
But I see the issue with that because then you're limiting my vulnerability. So if I behave that way, I'm not allowing myself to be vulnerable in front of you. So my vulnerability in this situation would be to ask straight out, why do you feel like that? I'm concerned about what makes you feel like that. I love
that
you.
second statement is all that's needed, not the first bit.
No, but what you said to say doesn't show, because I'm going to say, I'm concerned what makes you feel like that. Why do you feel like that? That's my vulnerability. That's me being honest with you as a spouse. I want to know. You're telling me don't be vulnerable and go by what she wants. No, I want to be vulnerable. I have a right to be vulnerable.
You and I have had this conversation before. For many hours on the phone. Oh.
Then she should be vulnerable back and say, I'm not ready to it's a tiny thing.
Yes, Magdi, this is what you are describing is the ideal ultimate world. But if I have not had experience or a practice in my marriage of doing that, then if I ask, it will be too difficult. It's like ripping off the Band-Aid. And then once it's ripped off the Band-Aid, I've been so hurt, I don't want to do that again. Right? And often what you'll get is a really angry response. And it'll either be, I don't want to tell you, I don't want to talk about it, leave it alone, you know, it's none of your business.
Or she won't say that again in future.
Or she will never say that again in future. So you must allow people to become vulnerable at their own pace, in their own way. Because it's a skill.
At the cost of your own vulnerability. I'm being honest, at the cost of your own vulnerability.
Look, it's not a mathematical, it's not an either or, Magdi. It's so grey, it's so difficult to.
So it takes a lot of wisdom, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely, it takes wisdom, and timing is impeccable. Like you don't, you know, person's just walked in after Friday night on a day, and you go sit down. I need to be vulnerable. This is what this is. It's not that. Yeah, absolutely, that's a weakness. You don't have wisdom, as Magdi says, and it's a strength to make that decision in the right way, considering your spouse. It's not about you, right? Vulnerability is not actually about you so much as it's about the other person.
So just trying to say, I'm being vulnerable at the same time. Like,
Oh no!
it's like if someone is feeling vulnerable, they need some support. It can't be like the other person has to need that support at the same time.
I think what we're using
You need someone to leave the other person out. You can't be both down.
Yeah, okay, so again, yes and no. So yes, you're right. If somebody is feeling very, very vulnerable and they're feeling weak, essentially, yes, the spouse needs to be strong and support them, absolutely. But sometimes when we're sharing and we're being vulnerable, the way to acknowledge what the other person is feeling is to also relate in some way to what they're saying. So if my spouse says to me, I felt really awkward in that group of people today, the conversation was awkward, I might not have felt that, but I might say, I didn't really feel it today, but I can understand why you might have today, or something along those lines. So, and I might say, I felt vulnerable in that group at a different time, for example. So I'm acknowledging their feeling, and I'm saying, I think that, I'm being vulnerable by sharing my emotions, a similar emotion at a different time. That's not me not being strong for the person, but when we share the same vulnerability, if you like, the same circumstance, it's still being strong together, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but it can turn into it's about me now.
Don't steal this spotlight.
That's where it needs to be through love. Like you said before, it's not about the vulnerability, it's about the other person still. Even when I'm weak, it's still about it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of wisdom, and like I said, timing is really, really important. And there's not like a set of rules I can give you, right, about how to do this. It's just like I can't give you a set of rules about how to love your spouse. I can tell you that love is a sacrifice. I can tell you that it's an action, that it's a decision that you have to make every minute. But I can't tell you what that action is. That depends on the other person that you're with. So you need the wisdom and you need the timing, right? And it needs to be about the other person, even if you're sharing your own.
When do you find this time because what was I feel like people have a routine and things can go wrong. You deal with it maybe in a wrong way and then move on. And you don't sometimes talk about the old issues because or you delve into it in the wrong way. So where do you find the time and like, bring it to the table when you consume guys as kids and stuff like that?
Look, it's really difficult. I'm not going to tell you that, that's a really important point. But it's the same question as where do you find the time to pray? Where do you find the time to eat? Right? And people who are busy often don't eat well, or they don't pray regularly. Like, it's got to be a conscious choice to make it part of your life. And so when you do, you start very small, and I think I've given you all this example before. At the beginning of, my marriage, just like every other marriage, it was difficult, right? It was me, my mum and dad, and my sister. That was our entire family for 20 plus years, living out on a dairy farm. Okay, it's like very little interaction with other people. And then I married a man who has like immediate cousins are 100, like, literally. And so, just visiting the house was like, I'm going to this major function, right? Because there's so many people around. And so for us, that was an issue. And so it was, difficult for me to transition, difficult for him to transition, going, why is she behaving like that? Like, why is she like wanting to run away after the first 10 minutes of being, at my home? And so what we did was literally started on our anniversary and kind of went, on our anniversary, what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you 3 things I love, 3 things I'm struggling with. That's all we did. It was once a year, right? It's not very regular. Over time, we couldn't wait until the anniversary date to kind of have that conversation. We didn't want to wait because it was such a useful conversation that we then just kind of went, can we go, can we have a conversation? And there is a difference.
Become 6 things.
No, the 3 things became almost the same things as we went on. They continued to be the same things. And there are things that I've just accepted and things that he's just accepted. Because they're not.
So do you mention them again still?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
mention them again?
Absolutely.
So does that mean the problem is the same issue every time every anniversary?
No.
Any program?
Not on some things.
How does
No.
that make you feel?
That's a question. You've got to make a statement.
I'm really glad to share.
So do you fall into the trap of like, you're in a good situation now, like things are going well, and then you don't want to be vulnerable, you don't want to bring up something that's bothering you because you want to keep peace, you want to it's not the right time, but then it's never the right time.
Absolutely.
Because that other time will be when you're really angry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the issue. If you don't make the time before, then it does become a much bigger issue because it will come out. Everything, all of the negativity, emotion that happens in us, right, has to come out at some point. It will. There is no way that you will go to the grave with these issues. It will come out. And so you want to have control over that. And so being proactive and choosing and making the time, even if it's once a year, is really, really helpful. And I just forgot what else I was going to say, so I'll let you speak.
You know how the question was said, is it the same thing every time? You said it's often the same thing.
Yes.
And how does it make you feel? Can you, as a spouse, ideally, isn't it just the fact that, okay, that's the weakness of my spouse. I need to just accept it.
Or not a weakness, but that's just
whatever it is against
their
them.
character.
Can you just accept it and try and live with it?
You must.
Okay, but then, huh?
But I still keep raising it. So the conversation becomes, okay, I'm going to answer you. So the conversation becomes, I can see you've tried a few times about this issue, and I understand it's hard, and it's still an issue for me, but we'll keep trying. It's an acceptance that each of us is not perfect. And he will say the same back. He'll go, and I know that you just can't make this happen.
So if you like the effort that they try,
They continue to try. We all continue to try.
No, that's the thing. They might just say it's my character. Like, you just have to accept it. I'm not going to try because I'm not going to change.
And so my response would be, and so I'm going to continue to have an issue with it because I'm telling you it's an issue.
What's an example of something that can keep going?
Okay, now I'm not going to give you a real example now.
Not your example.
Vulnerability stops here.
A typical example, like in any class. Maybe not now.
No. I have lots. I talk to a lot of people, so I have lots of examples just about bringing on
Something that
time.
you can't change or won't change immediately, so it'll keep coming up year after year.
Yeah. So for example, look, I'll take the example of coming from a really small family going into a big one. I mean, there can still be a rub around. I know that you really don't enjoy big crowds, and you really don't want to be dysfunction, until it finishes at the end and we're all doing the cleaning up. But I really need to do it for this event or for this event, And I go, yeah, it's really hard for me to do that. And so the response that comes back is, how about, I'll watch out for when I can see that you're really, really uncomfortable. And how about we do this together to get through the night?
Or a compromise we go for 2 hours or something.
Well, sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's like we actually just need to be there, right? We need to do this for 17 hours, and but just come and let me know if you're feeling comfortable, and then we'll stand together and have a drink or a conversation, or we'll just manage it for a time, and So you work together around the problem. I'm not going to change who I am. I was raised with 4 people. I can't change that. And what happens in your childhood and the way you were raised has very long-term impacts. So I can't shift that. It's always going to be an issue for me. I much prefer to be in a small space or at home on my own or whatever.
You don't like talking about emotions.
You're going to have a difficult marriage. It doesn't matter who you're talking about, because emotions are the core essence of who we are. God is love and God is spirit, and we're made in his image. So can you imagine God without emotion? Can you imagine Jesus without emotion, without the compassion and the empathy and the love that he showed when he was on the earth? It's not possible. That's the same for us. We can't be people without emotion. So if we don't talk about that core essence of who we are, if we don't deal with it and confront it, really difficult life. And it is uncomfortable for 90%. So it's normal, but that's the work. That's why the first 2 commandments, love God, love your neighbor. What's that about? It's about emotion. It's like, get on with it. Deal with your core essence.
Is it possible that some people think they don't like talking about emotion, but really issues that they don't know how, like they don't know how to express it?
Yeah, they're unpracticed. Yeah, absolutely. And Brene Brown, when she does her work, actually, I thought about it. She has a whole list of words to express emotion. We usually kind of go happy, sad, angry, but there's disappointed and, excitable and anxious and frustrated and courageous. And oh my God, the list is huge. And confused. Yes. And bewildered. And overwhelmed and all of those. So when we increase our dialogue, our vocabulary, absolutely, then we have more ways of talking about how we actually feel. The problem with showing is that your assumption is that the person in front of you understands the showing. Like I said, I'm here, I'm smiling and I'm laughing. Do you really know what emotions are inside unless I tell you?
Maggie, now you ask. Yeah, you can ask.
He didn't pick
That's your cue.
That was me.
That's the cue to ask.
I take the value of the importance of it. Do you think that, I guess that focus on how we do the language and how we say things and how we do like a function of how complex we as humans have become. I can't imagine like back in the days of the Old Testament, I can't imagine Adam and Eve having a similar conversation Noah and his wife and looking about, I can't believe that he didn't give that person a chance, or the fact that small things like that. Is that just because we've been doing it, or we've just had to think about it?
What was the last question?
Sorry, just think about that. I think I'll answer that in two ways.
Sorry, Sandra, what was this last?
Sorry, so the question is, do you think that all of this is because we've become more complicated? So he can't think of Noah and his wife or Adam and Eve kind of having these conversations. Two things. I don't think we have become more complicated. We were created in God's image just like Noah and Adam and Eve. So essentially, a human being is a human being. We live in a different context, no doubt. We live different lifestyles, no doubt. And we have, I guess, theories, and we've had conversations, and we have a different anthropology, if you like, a different way of understanding the world that we live in. If you think about Adam and Eve, the way they understood their world was directly through God. There was potentially no need for any of this.
But I think you don't even have to go that far. Just look at different
Great grandparents,
cultures.
2 generations.
Yeah.
They behave different.
Yeah.
Even that part, our great grandparents would have been very different.
Labeling something like let's just for argument's sake say they were living a simple life. Are they doing something core that they're missing?
They didn't question. If you think about, I don't know about your grandparents, but if you think about your grandparents, I'm sure. Think about your grandparents. Yes, we call it a simpler life, but why was it a simpler life? People didn't question and didn't look for power and authority. They were very content with what life was about. Very, very content. There was no need to make thousands of dollars, no need to have the best clothes, no need for the masks that we're talking about today, essentially, right? It was a very simple understanding. God created us to love each other, be married, have children, die, move on. That's, in Arabic they say that the sunnat al-hayah. I don't know if you understand that term.
The what, sorry?